Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight for our free webinar, Harnessing the Power of the Endocannabinoid System to Support Immunity, featuring Miles Sarill, Lead Educator with CV Sciences. My name is Jeff Bloom, Education Marketing Manager here at LASA OMS. For over 40 years, LASA OMS has been striving to promote the growth of the acupuncture industry by providing quality products, great prices, and the best customer service, as well as supporting the many schools and continuing education efforts available. With our free web series, we intend to provide free educational opportunities taught by some of our industry's most renowned practitioners and educators. I would like to take a moment to acclimate you to the webinar room. To the right of the video screen, you will see 3 tabs: Chat, Questions, and Polls. To chat with other attendees or to communicate any technical difficulties, please use the Chat tab. For questions with the guest speaker, please make sure to use the Questions tab so we see it when we're doing Q&A. Please note that each webinar is recorded, and immediately following the conclusion, you will all receive an email with a link to view the video on demand. Please note that tonight is a little different in that the platform is saying that it might take a little more time for the recording to be available, so please just give a little patience and maybe check tomorrow for that. You may always visit our blog and use the free webinar tag to find all of our previously recorded events. From sports acupuncture to Chinese herb, practice management to CBD, you'll find something interesting for every practitioner on the LASA OMS blog. Now for our featured speaker. We are proud to introduce Miles Sarill. National Educator for CV Sciences, Miles has authored articles and book chapters for publication, appeared as a subject matter expert guest on national radio, and has lectured around the country about the science of cannabinoids. Prior to this role, he received his Master of Science in Experimental Medicine from McGill University in Montreal, where he studied the regulation of lung antioxidant genes to environmental toxicants. While completing his master's, Miles worked as an educator at Cambridge Naturals, a renowned natural food supplement retailer in Cambridge, Massachusetts. His research background also includes studying cannabinoid-like compounds in the Peruvian maca root botanical extract at the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences in 2008. Please join me in welcoming Miles. And before we do this, Miles, at the top of your screen, you'll see a bell. If you can click that to turn off your notifications, that will make sure we don't hear a lot of dinging.
Okay, no more dinging.
Now, welcome, Miles.
Well, thank you so much for the warm introduction. I'm really excited for tonight, folks. I know there's a lot of chaos occurring in the country and in the world. We are going to be talking about stress management, but we're also going to be talking about the biochemistry behind that. Not a practitioner, although I have a deep respect for acupuncture, naturopathy, and other forms of integrative medicine and wellness modalities. I'm a laboratory scientist, and so I hope that my perspective in discussing how botanicals interact with various receptors and transcription factors in genes is of use to us, because I do want to translate some of my deep love for the biochemistry of how this stuff works into facts that you can use to help improve the wellness and well-being of people. And I think we can all use a little bit of that. So let me start by sharing with my screen, and we'll get started with this. I want to share this screen over here. All right, I hope we can all see that. I believe we can. I want to start by saying that these are all people at CV Sciences. These are all real people. These are not stock photos. The people that were involved in supporting the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, that got the legalization of the hemp plant, that got it off the Controlled Substances Act in 2018, they're in this photo. The people that make the hemp extracts in our laboratory, the people that market, the people that help to set up this webinar, they're in this photo over here. So I have a deep appreciation for everybody that I get to work with. CV Sciences is one of the first companies to produce CBD from hemp extracts as dietary supplements in the natural products industry. And I'm so grateful that I get to work for a company that is so respectful and honors the contributions of the people behind it. I also am really excited to work for a company that is invested in science. When it comes to CBD and products that influence our endocannabinoid system that we're going to be learning a lot about today, you find CBD products not just at the health food store, not just on LASA OMS. You find it at the gas station and mall kiosks, right? Is this stuff good quality? How do you know if it's real? How do you know if it's safe? When it comes to what CV Sciences offers, I just want to point out that, just need to advance this over here, we have invested in peer-reviewed scientific research. I've even authored one of the articles that's on this list over here. Even during the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, when my previous job description involved traveling all over the country to give lectures like this rather than digital lectures, we focused specifically on 4 peer-reviewed articles that got published in the Journal of Dietary Supplements. And they focused on the safety of the ingredient, the efficacy of the ingredient, and the composition of the ingredient. Because you not be aware of the fact that the Food and Drug Administration still does not regulate CBD products as dietary supplements. They still view them as drugs. Now, that might change as a result of the election. Who knows? There's a lot of policy changes and regulatory changes that are occurring. As I said, we're going to be talking about stress management today, and I know that there's a couple things that are on our minds regarding, this week's events. I also do, just separate from much else of what we're talking about, I want to acknowledge something positive, is that multiple states in this election cycle have legalized cannabis due to ballot initiatives. So there are positive things that are happening that will hopefully impact in a beneficial way all of our practices. I also want to point out before we really get started that CV Sciences has a YouTube channel with other lectures, video content, fun animations, and podcasts. So if you like the type of content that you're hearing from me tonight, please, I ask you to go to YouTube, go to CV Science on YouTube, and hit like and subscribe. That means a lot to us. I want to get started by talking about stress and immune function by reading to you a quote from the New England Journal of Medicine in April of 2020. COVID-19 is probably on everybody's minds right now. In Massachusetts and my state, cases are rising yet again, and there might be a number of reasons for that. Now, this quote, "We must realize that in our crowded world of almost 8 billion people, a combination of altered human behaviors, environmental changes, and inadequate global public health mechanisms now easily turn obscure animal viruses into existential human threats." What do we do about that? Whether it's the skyrocketing COVID-19 cases, or even whether it's the seasonal flu, what I want to paint for you is a picture of intersectionality, that there are a lot of features and factors that go into any viral pandemic, that it's not just about the virus. Now, I want to be clear. What I'm going to talk about as it relates to any disease, viral infections or whatever, this is for educational purposes only. I'm not claiming that any product necessarily is a treatment or cure for any disease. But I want us to understand that in our basic goal of whether it's COVID-19 or the flu season, whichever, millions of illnesses result in millions of medical visits, although a smaller number, result in hundreds of thousands of hospitalizations, result in tens of thousands of deaths. Where we understand that we can keep you either out of this paradigm altogether or just keep you dealing with a flu illness and without transitioning over to a medical visit is exercise, lifestyle, diet filled with brightly colored fruits and vegetables, good supplementation, right? Acupuncture, the right types of integrative approaches can keep either out of this paradigm or just in square one. And I want to talk about some of the reasons why, especially as it relates to stress management and stress hygiene. There's a relationship between the immune system and the stress response system. And stress isn't just an emotion. It is a physiologic system. So I want us to kind of imagine these two as sort of being on the opposite end of a seesaw. One goes up, the other goes down, kind of. The immune system protects us against internal threats, microscopic threats, bacteria, fungi, yeast, viruses, helminths, etc. Things that indeed inside of us. Now, our stress response system that is primarily backed up by our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, protects us against external threats. So imagine yourself a hunter-gatherer 10,000 years ago, and you're picking berries, and a big cat attacks you. You're going to need your fight or flight response and your release of hormones such as cortisol or epinephrine, adrenaline, to help you run away. You're probably not going to fight against the cat, right? Unless you're that runner in Colorado. The problem is that was 10,000 years ago, and now many people are sitting on the couch watching the election, feeling their fight-flight response go up, even though they're not in physical danger in that very moment, most likely. So what their body is responding to is a paper tiger, an imagined tiger, if you will. HPA axis was evolved to protect us against external threats outside of the body. Now, both the immune system and the HPA axis require huge amounts of energy in order to operate functionally, okay? If you've ever had the flu before, and you've been too tired to pick up a glass of water on your nightstand, you're lying in bed, you know how much energy your immune system requires in order to fight the fight. Similarly, the fight or flight response of the HPA axis requires a lot of energy in order to help you run away and survive. So it turns out that too much HPA axis activity, too much stress hormone cortisol activity shuts down the immune system to ensure that there's enough energy for the stress response to work. Now, that's great for temporary uses. It's not great for everyday chronic stress that robs your immune system of energy. And in doing so, it sends the immune system into a tailspin. Stress feeds inflammation. Inflammation is a crucial component of our immune system, but in excess is also very detrimental. So I want to explain this a little bit further. I probably don't need to go through this too much. Essentially, signals in our brain, in parts of the brain that have to do with fear, amygdala, etc., signal to other parts of the brain, hypothalamus, pituitary. There's this whole cascade of hormones that results in the adrenals releasing cortisol, and cortisol has a number of effects in metabolism, in the body, in the peripheral nervous system, in the immune system that coordinate the stress response. And it's really good at shutting down the immune system. It's so good that Walgreens has put the stress hormone cortisol in a cream form to put on your rashes and stuff, which are effectively immune responses in the skin. So I like this example of how effective our stress hormones, in fact, are at augmenting immune activity. But we did not evolve to be under fear conditions 24 hours a day. We did not evolve for cortisol to be spreading across our body, affecting the immune system, affecting metabolic processes, keeping us in a fight or flight response all day long. And this is why things like sleep hygiene are so important for our immune health. Because when we sleep, when our melatonin goes up to help us get to bed, cortisol goes down. Cortisol is neither good nor bad, it just is. Cortisol helps us wake up in the morning. But too much cortisol throughout the day just melatonin, then we can't sleep. Under a normal stress response, there's a brief activation of the HPA axis, a brief release of cortisol, which blocks inflammation. Cortisol binds to glucocorticoid receptors, which is a cytosolic transcription factor within the immune cells. And then that's fine. But then under chronic stress, whether that's physical stress, chronic mental stress, chronic stress caused by improper nutrition, can lead to cortisol resistance. Adrenals push out cortisol. The immune cells are starting to say, hey, you're crying wolf. And they start to do whatever the heck they want. And then that will lead to inflammation, because when immune cells aren't controlled, when they're not regulated effectively, then they can go through various inflammatory processes more unchecked, especially because cortisol is associated with increased gut permeability, leaky gut. It's a whole other topic. But leaky gut can really drive a lot of chronic inflammation and may be associated with chronic stress. And then eventually, under chronic stress conditions, There's cortisol resistance. The adrenals bottom out. They just stop producing cortisol at this point. This is where we see folks with chronic fatigue syndrome. It's where we see folks with a number of chronic inflammatory diseases, and where certain adaptogen and tonic botanicals can really be rescuing for these folks. This is a peer-reviewed article, and I really think that it's useful in kind of framing the conversation between stress and our immune activity. There are associations with cortisol levels with inflammatory markers. Now, the first sentence is kind of obvious to me, but I think it's so important that it is the sentence of this scientific article. Socioeconomic and psychosocial factors are associated with systemic inflammation. If you are impoverished, often if you are a person of color, often, there's so many features in society that might predispose for somebody having higher levels of stress, higher levels of inflammation. Take a look at this. Persons with higher levels of the inflammatory cytokine interleukin-6 had a less pronounced cortisol awakening response, less cortisol rising in the morning when it's supposed to help you wake you up, and higher cortisol under the curve for the whole day. So cortisol is completely out of balance. It's likely they're not sleeping well, and they have higher amounts of IL-6. Well, what's going on with COVID-19 right now? There's this discussion of the cytokine storm, of inflammatory factors causing tissue damage in response to how the immune cells are trying to contain the virus. And IL-6 is one of these inflammatory cytokines that is often involved with fibrosis and lung tissue damage. And so, yes, what I am suggesting here is that improper stress hygiene or stress management might be one of the features of the disease known as COVID-19 that involves lung damage. Tie this in, I deeply appreciate the work of the epidemiologist who I believe is at Cornell University, Robert Fullilove, has written about the planetary diet as a form of global disease prevention, understanding that in the United States, there are many people, perhaps many of our patients or your patients are people that aren't eating the best. They're eating foods with too much inflammatory arachidonic acid, omega-6, too many macronutrients, too much protein, not enough vitamins, not enough minerals, not enough micronutrients, not enough flavonoids, greens, things that can have a healing or anti-inflammatory effect in the body. The standard American diet, SAD, is one of the key factors of metabolic and inflammatory imbalances in this country. And if we ate better, perhaps we might have a response in terms of this pandemic that might be a little bit more like you're seeing in other parts of the world, which, to be fair, is still not great, but we're not, per capita, some of the other countries aren't suffering to the same degree that we are. And also, Robert Fullilove highlights the fact that people of color are dying of COVID-19 at greater rates or suffering from it at greater rates, perhaps because of some of the socioeconomic effects on stress and inflammation that I just highlighted for you. So this is the picture that I want to build us out for what we're dealing with today. That access to care, healthcare infrastructure, poor diet and lifestyle choices. Really, there's a lot of background features that play into how devastating any pandemic can be. And it's really kind of like the virulence, how much a virus spreads from me to you or vice versa. That is kind of the cherry on top in terms of what it's doing in the world right now. And then there's another feature that we can talk about is mental health. Because again, what happens is I remember, back at the start of the pandemic, back in March, you turn on the TV, it's constant news footage of coronavirus, and you see people getting more and more nervous, even though they might not be in physical danger at that time. Their stress response to what they're seeing, or the election, or you open a piece of a letter in the mail and it's a bill, right? Like that all triggers a cortisol response, fight or flight response, even though one is not in physical danger in that very moment, robs the immune system of the energy it needs to effectively defend itself from what we're fearing against. So what do we do about it? Again, I'm not claiming that we have any cure for any disease whatsoever. But going back to what I first discussed is that we understand that nutrition, lifestyle, acupuncture, and the right proper botanical and vitamin supplementation are tools in our toolkit that we can use to expand our social circle, to kind of support the healing of society. That's what I want to believe anyway. That's my lofty kind of dream vision, is that we can incorporate nutrients in the right way to make this bigger and better. Because I don't know if what you're seeing over here, you see this in some places like parks in San Francisco and New York City, drawing these 6 feet circles on the ground. All right, everybody get in your 6 feet bubble. We want to make that a little bit bigger. Now, I know that was just a lot that we talked about. I want to distill it down to kind of the basic premise of, okay, when stress is up, immune function's down, kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. There is a third system that helps to allocate resources between stress and between immune function. And that is known as the endocannabinoid system. And we're going to talk about the endocannabinoid system. We're going to talk about some of the biochemistry of the endocannabinoid system. Because when we talk about botanical ingredients like hemp and CBD from hemp, this is where we're starting to understand that there might be a solution for the basic paradigm of stress and immune dysfunction, that there is something that people are using to manage their stress health a little bit better. So how is it that CBD works? Let's jump in. This is one of a scientist that I have a deep appreciation for. This is Dr. Vincenzo Di Marzo. In 1998, Dr. Vincenzo wrote that it is our endocannabinoid system that helps our body relax, eat, sleep, protect, and forget. We have cannabinoid receptors all throughout our body that are responsible for numerous physiological processes. The system is only recently discovered, i.e. the early 90s. And we're going to talk a lot more in depth about it. But keep in mind that that's why it's not really in our med school textbooks, because it's still a little bit new in terms of our understanding of how it works and what it does exactly. Now, I just want us to think about this. We have these cannabis-like transmitters in our brain, and they're responsible for sleep. They're responsible for eating. Hey, wait a minute. If you consume cannabis and it's rich in THC, let's say you smoke a joint or whatever, and you get the munchies from that. THC is flooding the brain, flooding these receptors, and driving excess food-seeking behavior. However, it turns out we have cannabinoid receptors in our brain that control when you're hungry throughout the day. You also find them in the gut, where they support the release of hunger hormones, such as ghrelin. So this system is found all throughout the body. And when we take cannabis medicines, cannabis recreationally, it augments the system and gives us the effects of being high or having the munchies or forgetting what happened to you that night, that sort of thing. Now, in many ways, the United States was built on hemp. Hemp has been a cash crop in the New World, but also you find humans using hemp extending back 10,000 years in agricultural purpose for agricultural uses in Central Asia, in Tibet, in India, and in Afghanistan. You find some of the original plants evolved there and spread throughout the world. Hemp was really important all throughout the United States history up until about the 40s, when the government said, no more. They passed what they called the Marijuana Tax Act, which really started to demonize the plant. And then in the Controlled Substances Act in the 1960s, the whole thing was kind of shoved under the rug, and it wasn't even allowed to research the plant in the United States at that point anymore. Which was too bad, because what happened is a senator caught his son smoking weed and was like, oh no, we can't research this plant at the National Institutes of Health. Is my son going to die? Is this thing super toxic? But what the NIH did in response to that phenomenon is actually grant funding for a young scientist based out of Hebrew University in Israel. His name was Raphael Mechoulam, and he elucidated the chemical structures of CBD and THC and identified them as the major plant constituents, and identified THC as the major constituent that has psychological or psychotropic effects in the early 60s. However, they didn't know how CBD or THC worked at all for the next couple of decades. And it wasn't until Dr. Alin Howlett, the University of Washington, St. Louis, discovered that we produce cannabinoid receptors in our brains. Specifically, they used rat brains for the study, but they found that cannabinoid receptors were extremely abundant throughout the brain. So 1988, she discovers this. It actually causes Meshulam to go back and say, well, wait a minute. It's not very likely that we would have cannabinoid receptors in our brain for just a plant. What is the endogenous compound that could plug into these receptors? And in 1992, Meshulam and his team, still researching at this point 30 years later, they discovered a fatty lipid signaling molecule that's based on arachidonic acid, omega-6, and it's called anandamide. And it was Bill Devane, one of the researchers in Dr. Meshulam's laboratory. Dr. Devane was kind of a mystic, a meditator, and he said, hey, this is like our body's bliss molecule. This is our body's own version of THC, and named it after the Sanskrit word ananda for bliss and joy. So folks, this is our bliss molecule. Anandamide is our molecule that is associated with certain types of kind of joyous emotions. It turns out that the runner's high, when you're dancing, when you're exercising, your brain is actually flooded with anandamide, with one of our endocannabinoids over here. And then throughout the 90s, they discovered more cannabinoid receptors, and they discovered more cannabinoids, and dozens of endogenous cannabinoids, all derived from lipids that bind to these receptors. In fact, the endocannabinoid system is a three-legged stool that is built by these G protein coupled receptors. They're membrane bound, found in the brain, but also found in multiple tissues all throughout the body. Very abundant in the brain, abundant in the immune system, the gut, the skin, so on and so forth. There are the transmitters that bind to those receptors. And then there are enzymes that build up the transmitters as well as break them down. So folks, when we talk about endocannabinoid system, it's not like it's an organ system or a gland that you can point to and say, here it is. It's really more like a neurotransmitter system. Think of it being a little bit analogous to serotonin. However, with serotonin, you have transmitter, serotonin, and 7 different receptors, and then all the transporters and enzymes that build up serotonin. Well, with the endocannabinoid system, it's a little bit like the other way around, where you have just 2 receptors, and then you have dozens of different endocannabinoids that your body produces to bind to those receptors. CB1 receptor is what's predominantly in the nervous system, but also found in the lungs, liver, skin, gut epithelium, etc. Whereas CB2 receptors are primarily found in cells of myeloid lineage, aka immune cells, on and on and on. There are the endocannabinoids that directly bind to the receptors that have allosteric effects, such as anandamide or 2-arachidinylglycerol. And then your body also produces these entourage compounds. And what I mean by that is that certain fatty molecules that your body will produce on demand, like palmitoyl ethanolamide, which stands for PEA for short, is a molecule that's endocannabinoid-like. Your body produces it with similar enzymes and breaks it down with similar enzymes as anandamide. However, it does not directly bind to the receptor. And this is one of the tools that our body really uses to fine-tune the endocannabinoid system. It will release PEA at the same time as anandamide. And in doing so, can really alter the tone and volume and directionality and spatiality of the response intracellularly to those cannabinoids. Think of it like an orchestra. Think of it like if anandamide is a clarinet and 2-AG is an oboe, then PEA might be a violin. It doesn't directly bind to the receptor, but it can help to augment the melody. And this is where this thing gets so complicated, is our body will go at great lengths to produce many different endocannabinoids to create different sounds, if you will. Now, it turns out that if the sound is off, the tone is off, maybe the conductor is not playing the right time for your endocannabinoid orchestra, then this is associated with certain pathological states. Modulating the endocannabinoid system has been shown to be useful as a therapeutic tool for a broad range of diseases, including neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, inflammatory disorders, obesity, metabolic syndrome, pain, so on and so forth. So in some ways, these endocannabinoids can be thought of as the control on a hot air balloon. Too much might lead you to a disease state. Too little might be associated with a disease state. We talk about the endocannabinoid system as promoting homeostasis and balance within certain tissues. And if that homeostasis is repeatedly disturbed, maybe by something like stress or inflammation, then one might have a problem. The endocannabinoids are derived from the lipid bilayer. They're generated on demand, and they are transmitted across the synapse where they bind to the transmembrane receptors, CB1 or CB2, as well as some other receptors we're not going to get into just right now, where they're then taken up by enzymes and then can be broken down, or they can bind to various nuclear factors that have their own set of effects, especially in terms of metabolism. What I want you to keep in mind is that these transmitters are released and act very rapidly within seconds and minutes. And the space by which they act is in very small spaces, from one cell to another, paracrine and autocrine signaling. These are not hormones. These do not spread across the body where they have a wide range of effects so much. You do find blood endocannabinoids, but they're not really representative of what might be happening in a certain tissue at a certain time. So this is really localized homeostasis conducted by these endogenous molecules. And one of that form of homeostasis is actually on immune cells. You find cannabinoid 1 and cannabinoid 2 receptors on mast cells and macrophages. Let's take a cross-section of the intestinal layer, for example. In the lamina propria, you find mast cells that are, on the other side of the gut epithelium, and they respond to any leakiness in that gut barrier, for example. Excess inflammation can actually be blocked by targeting these cannabinoid receptors. So if a mast cell is releasing tumor necrosis factor alpha or some other cytokine, anandamide might be released from one cell where it could bind to cannabinoid receptors and actually quiet some of that inflammatory response. And I added this slide for tonight's audience. It turns out that research is being conducted on the endocannabinoid system as being partly responsible for the beneficial effects of acupuncture. That perhaps insertion of a needle, needling, or some other techniques can drive endocannabinoid activity in the nerves close to the acupuncture point or along the meridian that is being worked on. So that's a fun fact. And I think this is actually a really good place. We're at the halfway point now. I just want everybody to get up out of their seats. Deep breath. Stretch. Jeff, any questions? Has anybody asked any questions? I would love to take a moment to answer your questions as we're taking our brief intermission before we can go on.
Well, we do have a question here from Melissa. Would you mind explaining the relationship between the ECS and the HPA axis?
That's a really, really great question. Thank you for asking that. It's complicated, but there has been some research done on this, especially as it relates to PTSD, is that because what happens in trauma is the HPA axis gets engaged, and there are the parts of the brain that respond to fear. Some of these stress hormones that get released as part of the fight or flight response can actually drive the activity of enzymes that break down anandamide, right? Our bliss molecule. So this molecule goes down, effectively stress goes up. And again, that might be useful for these transient fight or flight responses, but certainly not beneficial if you're under stress 24 hours a day, all week long, like I personally have been this week.
All right. Well, I don't know if we have any other questions. Maybe let's just give one more second to see if anyone else has one. Ooh,
yeah.
Actually, it looks like Wendy would like to know, has a relationship between the endocannabinoid system and meridians ever been established?
So this is something I would love to learn more about. You know, the types of research that's being done on acupuncture, it's still kind of in its primacy that relates to kind of the biochemistry. I mean, I know I've seen certain acupuncture points associated with changes in inflammatory cytokines. Unfortunately, I don't know which acupuncture points on hand exactly. I saw one study linking meridians themselves to a form of oxidative or redox reactions across that meridian. And it's possible that endocannabinoid system is involved with that, but maybe we'll just have to do the research someday.
Alrighty, and actually we have a question here from Kevin. As we look to supplement with phytocannabinoids like CBD, CBG, etc., for a variety of pathogens, is there a way to first measure the pre-existing endocannabinoid levels, specifically AEA and 2AG, in order to better understand what levels of supplementation may be effective or appropriate?
Sort of. That's a really great question. Like I said, you can measure your blood levels of anandamide and 2AG. However, the blood levels aren't necessarily going to be representative of what's happening in the brain. In fact, if you really want to do that, you're going to need to measure cerebral spinal fluid, which involves a spinal tap. And so you could do it. Most people obviously are not going to want to do that in order to find out how much CBD they need. And to my best knowledge, a lot of the integrative sort of laboratories and diagnostic sources aren't yet measuring cannabinoids yet. What you can do is look at SNPs, genetic polymorphisms. There are certain polymorphisms that are associated more so with THC use or recommending THC over CBD. Again, this whole thing is in its infancy. What we've always said is to start low with CBD and to work your way up, because that's sort of the best way of gauging, okay, how do you respond from one dose to another? Because your dosage that you find that CBD works best for your system based on where your anandamide or 2AG is at may be totally different than mine, right? And again, it's not just about phytocannabinoids that augment endocannabinoid system. Exercise, meditation, fatty acid content, eating more fish oil or fish foods, or omega-3 containing foods, chia seeds, flax seeds, over omega-6 containing foods can augment the relationship between endocannabinoid tone and inflammation. So there's a lot of features to this. And this is one of the things that makes scientists kind of so nuts about it, is that it's really interesting, but it's also really complicated.
Well, we actually have some more questions coming in as well.
Okay, I'm going to answer one more.
Okay.
And then we'll save some for the end, because I got a lot more I want to share with you tonight, folks.
All right. And this question is actually really interesting. How to give CBD products to people who need it that can't afford it? Because they're pretty expensive. So right. I don't know if you have any suggestions. I do know that, CBD products do tend to be on the lower end of the pricing structure when you compare to other CBD brands. And it's a very well-known, high-quality brand. So, I mean, you can get there are some bottles, I think, that have a couple 100 milligrams or at least 100 milligrams for around maybe $15 for a practitioner price. So that's a, fairly inexpensive way to get some cannabinoids to your patients. I don't know if you have any other suggestions, or maybe you guys have like a donation program or something.
Well, all that I'm going to say is if you have a patient that is really in need, email me afterwards and I'll see what I can do. Unfortunately, in the way that the world currently works, CV Sciences does need to make a profit in order to survive so that we can continue to make these products. What we have personally been committed to is as we produce these products and we get more out in the marketplace, as we've supported transitioning hemp to be grown domestically rather than just abroad, we can start to lower the cost of it. But unfortunately, when it comes to CBD, sometimes the products that do appear to be cheaper aren't made the best way, or can be synthetic, or are made with harsher solvents. So, sometimes it does, it does make sense to pay for quality, but we do really want to make this as accessible for as many people as possible. I'm with you on that.
All right. Well, I'm going to get off the screen and let you get back into the webinar. I do notice there's a few questions in the chat. For the people who put them in the chat, please put them in the questions tab because it'll assure that we see them at the end when we go back to finish Q&A. All right, now I'm gone.
All right, thank you. All right, so what I want to transition over to is not just talking about CBD, but also talking about other botanicals that may support the endocannabinoid system, other nutrients that may support the endocannabinoid system. And I apologize, any of this sounds like a sales pitch, but I personally have been involved with the formulations and research on these new non-CBD products that CV Sciences has come out with to nourish other aspects of the immune function. And one of them is based on a botanical formula that is rooted in traditional Chinese herbalism. So I'm really excited to be talking about that with you. Let's start by mentioning that as we sort of zoom out and really discuss the immune system, especially in more detail, the immune system is incredibly complex. It's not just about endocannabinoids. That's just one little part of the immune system. The immune system is where intuition goes to die. That's not my quote. I believe Vincent Racaniello says that on the podcast This Week in Virology. It's really very complicated. The three major activities of the immune system we can break down include barrier immune function. That includes your skin, your mucous membranes. Innate immunity on the other side of the epithelial barriers are cells that are there to kind of contain the invader the moment that the barrier immunity is disrupted. And then adaptive immunity that comprises T lymphocytes, B cells that produce antibodies that really create a specific immunity. That is one of the reasons why we never catch the same flu twice effectively. Or the reasons why vaccines may work in the body is through targeting cells such as B cells and T cells of the adaptive immune system. So CV defense and CV acute support the immune system through different ways. I'm going to talk about the science behind how the ingredients in these two new products of ours can support the immune system. And I want to start by talking about CV acute. This again, I'm really excited to be talking to this audience specifically about this. Again, I am not trained in traditional Chinese herbalism and medicine specifically, but just from my background in biochemistry, I've been fascinated by the articles I've been reading out the botanicals in CV acute. CV acute is based on an herbal formula, and the herbs of which have been used for thousands of years in traditional Chinese medicine, although specifically this formula was modernized in the 1960s. Now, correct me on my pronunciation. I believe that the Chinese name for this formula is Shuanghulian. We're going to call it SHL for short. SHL is cited by the World Health Organization for its role in containing SARS in 2004, and avian flu. It's used in hospitals in China. They actually turned it into an injectable drug. It works so well over there. However, there are studies that show that the oral preparation works just as well as the injectables. It's 100% plant-based. It's been used in children. There are multiple human and preclinical studies on the three herbs in here. Specifically, we're talking about the flower of honeysuckle, the fruit of forsythia, and the root of skullcap. And the combination is known as SHL. So this is regarded as one of the leading choices in preventing and treating the wind heat type of common cold. And specifically, the combination of these herbs has a wide variety of various nutrients and constituents in there that can target our cells and our immune function in different ways, specifically for respiratory, viral, and immune health. So if I were to break down research that I've seen on the SHL preparation, containing the flower of honeysuckle, the root of skullcap, and the fruit of forsythia, there are clear direct antiviral activities, immunomodulatory activities, and anti-inflammatory activities. And each one of these are very important for different ways. I mean, I'm going to go into them in a little bit more detail. There are multiple constituents within each of these botanicals that may have an effect. I mean, within forsythia, I read one study where they identified 44 different phenolic molecules that had the ability to disrupt viral replication or have an antioxidant effect. I had to pick three, just for the sake of this slide. One of them that I'm really fascinated by that's found in honeysuckle. Latin name is Lycera japonica. Honeysuckle contains what's called a microRNA 2911, and it has clear effects in disrupting viral replication. Now, one of the reasons I'm so hot about this microRNA is that most of the time, microRNA is produced endogenously within our own bodies. And microRNA are these small fragments of RNA that do not code for peptides. They don't get translated. Instead, our cells employ microRNA to disrupt signaling of messenger RNA. And most of the time, microRNA in plants are destroyed when you eat them. But it turns out that when you decoct lonicera and you prepare it according to TCM standards, that the microRNA survives that decoction process and actually gets absorbed into exosomes where it gets transported by our body to lungs. It's really, really cool. I have a slide on that just coming up. And then, of course, with Bicycle skullcap, there's a flavonoid known as bicolin, very potent anti-inflammatory, antiviral effects. Now, I just want to share this with you. This is published in Cell Discovery, which is a Nature publishing group journal, really well peer-reviewed article. Very recent was found that the microRNA from honeysuckle inhibits coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, replication in vitro, in vivo, and in humans. And they actually did a study in patients in China where when you give them the microRNA derived from honeysuckle, that it rapidly speeds up the time by which it takes them from appearing COVID positive to COVID negative by PCR test. That's really cool. This is an open access paper. So all of you can Google this right now and read the article and look this up. Again, I'm not claiming that there's any amount of microRNA in CV acute or that CV acute's a cure for any disease, but I am suggesting that honeysuckle has this unique property. The science is very interesting. We hope that more science will come out about this because just from a basic level, it's truly fascinating to me. You know, the way that viruses replicate in our cells, they bind to a receptor on the exterior, and that's sort of like a key binding to a lock. The virus gets taken up, it dumps genetic material. The genetic material is read in our nucleus, in our cells, where all of that RNA, or in some cases DNA, either it replicates within the cell, our cell replicates it, but it also translates that into viral proteins. The virus reassembles within the cell and then buds off where it infects other cells. Compounds like bicolin from Bicycle skullcap directly jam up the lock. They jam up the receptor, in other words, and prevent viruses from entering the cell, as well as have an effect on blocking the exit of the de novo virions from the cell. Oftentimes, it will inhibit enzymes such as neuraminidase, which influenza uses in order to exit the cell. Bicycle skullcap has been shown to do this. And then you add in the microRNA. MicroRNA would disrupt viral replication within the nucleus of the cell. And then compounds like forsythia from Forsythia have an overall role in protecting the cell from oxidative damage and inflammation as the immune system tries to grapple with the viral load. So this is one of those in which the combination of herbs can have a sparing and protective role in lung cells and in other tissues. Tying this back to the endocannabinoid system, I really appreciate this article over here on the tonic feeding of endocannabinoid tone through non-cannabinoids, i.e., let's forget about CBD, let's forget about THC. What other nutritional tools can we use to target and support the endocannabinoid system? And specifically, they mention flavonoids from berries and plants as having this role. So it's not too much of a stretch to say that bicolin in the SHL formula can support a healthy endocannabinoid tone as well. And then when we look at the human clinical data, you go to PubMed, you type in Shuanghonglian, you can see all sorts of evidence suggesting that it does speed up recovery as it relates to cough, breathing, immune function, etc. So far as how CV Sciences is producing CV Acute, we have it goes through multiple levels of laboratory testing, all of our strict quality control standards that we apply to CBD. We have applied to the CV Acute formula as well, and we have ways of identifying the major active constituents in CV Acute, as well as finding that there are no levels of pesticides or heavy metals detected in the formula. In fact, it's a registered Health Canada natural product, the ingredient that we're using, and Health Canada has stronger safety standards than the Food and Drug Administration of the United States. So I really like to think that we're honoring all of the intention and tradition with this herbal formula and bringing it to United States audiences, sort of scientific rigor. So we talked about CBD, we talked about CV Acute, and the way that CV Acute is intended to be used is as a liquid formula to be taken the moment you start to feel disruptions, fire in the throat, wind causing you chills. This is what sort of can be used, break glass in case of emergency, and you keep taking it until basically the bottle is done. And I bet that most people would feel better by that point. And then we have CV Defense, which I'll talk about next, is a daily defense product that's more so used for balancing immune function throughout the whole season. This is more rooted in nutraceutical and integrative medicine. It's a combination of vitamins and minerals, but the star of the show here is an endocannabinoid-like molecule that I mentioned earlier called PEA. PEA stands for palmitoyl ethanolamide. PEA, I believe, will be the next CBD. It's not there in terms of popularity yet, but the science on it is exquisite. It seems to work really well for which it's intended. And I believe that once people start taking it, they're going to understand what PEA can do for them. With CV Defense, we also add a little bit of an organic reishi mushroom extract. Reishi mushroom is useful for a number of different factors. It contains beta-glucans that stimulate natural killer cells in our body. You know, we add in minerals like zinc and selenium that strengthens the function of our adaptive immunity. Vitamin A helps our barrier immunity. Vitamin D also helps our innate immunity. And PEA can have effects on all three. So PEA, you know, I'm kind of hyping it up right now. I'm very interested in it as a scientist. I think it has great roles in supporting the endocannabinoid system. It has all these other off-target effects. Put right in the chat. Have you heard of it? Do you use it? Is it something that you're aware of? I'm curious to know what your responses are, because it turns out that most people that I've talked to anyway aren't very familiar with PEA. But it has a unique history. And I know I'm starting out of time. If you're willing to go a couple minutes over with me, I'd love to just take you through this history in the next 10 minutes. Let's go to the year of 1939. The year of 1939, United States of America was still dealing with the effects of the Great Depression. And children living in cramped New York City apartments that were living with families or from families that were really impoverished were dealing with the effects of rheumatic fever. They're catching infectious diseases that would lead to them to get rheumatic fever. The bacteriologists, including Dr. Alvin Coburn, discovered that feeding children dried egg yolks specifically helped them with rheumatic fever, basically completely reduced their symptoms. And Coburn went on to speculate that, well, there must be something in very small quantities in egg yolks that is having this anti-inflammatory activity, and that these children are too poor to afford to eat eggs as a result of the Great Depression or whatever, and that's why they're getting sick. But they didn't know what it was in the egg yolks. All right, so hold that thought, because I want to skip across the Atlantic Ocean. It's 1939. Dr. Rita Levi Montalcini just lost her job due to at the University of Turin in northern Italy due to Mussolini's 1938 laws barring Jews from academic positions. Brilliant physician scientist. At this point, she's been studying how it is that the nervous system develops. At the height of World War II, she had to flee south to the city of Florence, Firenze, where she lived with friends. She was hiding Nazi persecution. While she was hiding, she set up a laboratory in the corner of the place where she was staying, hiding out. And she continued to study using eggs and chicken embryos how the nervous system develops. While she was doing that, she was using her medical expertise to support the Italian Action Party, which are one of the partisan groups that helped to topple Mussolini's regime, along with the American soldiers. She survived the Holocaust, and the critical work that she conducted during this time as a refugee was the foundation for her research into discovering nerve growth factor that helped her win the Nobel Prize in 1986. Well, what does that have to do with the story in New York City in 1939? Well, these two tales have PEA in common. PEA was discovered in 1957. And within the next couple of years, they discovered that it had anti-allergic and anti-inflammatory effects. Kober, in his later years, speculated that it was in fact PEA in dried egg yolks that was the cause for these children getting better when they had rheumatic fever. Well, what does Dr. Rita Levi-Montalcini have to do with PEA? She discovered how it works. PEA was known to exist in certain foods and was known to have an anti-inflammatory effect. But in 1993, Dr. Levi-Montalcini found that PEA is released by mast cells to limit their inflammatory responses. That PEA actually influences other endocannabinoids. I don't think it's any coincidence that she discovered PEA just a year after Raphael Mechoulam discovered anandamide, principal endocannabinoid. And that PEA actually works on receptors that are parallel their activity to cannabinoid receptors. Some describe PEA as an endo-antihistamine in terms of how it works at mast cells. And it was Dr. Rita that made this discovery. In fact, one of the ways in which PEA might work is to disrupt the enzyme that breaks down the endocannabinoids, anandamide and 2-AG. And PEA works at other receptor targets that may someday be classified as being part of the endocannabinoid system as a whole. Now, I know I'm kind of jumping across time and space here, but I want to talk about one of the big research studies that really drove the use of PEA as an anti-inflammatory as part of immune prophylaxis. This is an aerial photo of the Škoda Works factory, Škodovi Zadovi, in Czechoslovakia in 1974. Because in Central and Eastern Europe, PEA actually got turned into a pharmaceutical drug called Pulsin. And in Czechoslovakia, thousands of people, including those in the military and those at this factory, workers at Škoda Works, where they produce tanks and automobiles and industrial cranes and other material, really big factory. Thousands of workers were assigned either placebo or PEA and given them every single day throughout the cold season. And it was found that everyday treatment with PEA markedly diminished the number of episodes of fever, headache, and sore throat. Excuse me. In one of the studies, there's up to 60% protection in the group that was given PEA from symptoms associated with common cold and common flu. PEA was found to have a strong safety profile that through years of clinical testing was really found at a number of different dose ranges and thousands of people to be effective and safe. So I'm really fascinated by this molecule as something that's both produced inside of us as part of our endocannabinoid system, but also something that you can take in a pill to use to support your immune response throughout the whole season. And this is basically the end of the presentation now. And I want you to, please keep asking me questions. I could talk about this for the next 4 hours if you wanted me to. What CV Sciences is offering are science-based solutions to modern challenges. Yet we look to nature to understand where we can implement science best. We have a lot of tools in our toolkit. Lifestyle changes, diet changes, acupuncture, Tuina, exercise, whatever, right? There's so much that we can do to improve our body's health. And I believe what is central to our body's health is a healthy endocannabinoid system. plus CBD is just part of the puzzle. And I apologize if this sounds like a sales pitch. We all need to make an honest living. CV Defense and CV Acute are two new products that are without CBD that I'm enthusiastic about to help our body get back on track during unprecedented times. They don't work like any other ingredients that I've come across effectively. So, sometimes people ask me, well, I'm taking vitamin C for health. Maybe I take yin chow, that kind of stuff. You can keep taking this stuff too. I want most people to be stocking these 3 products at home, whether it's CV Acute to break glass in case of emergency, or CV Defense and plus CBD to take every day to balance their endocannabinoid tone and their HPA axis. Thank you so much for listening tonight. Go to our YouTube, CV Sciences on YouTube, like and subscribe for video content and more lectures from other professionals, not just myself. We have other educators and scientists that maybe have some factoids that you would like to learn. Everybody stay healthy, stay well, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Wow, we do have a few more questions, Miles. So are you able to answer a couple?
I will stick around to answer every last question.
Well, I appreciate that, and so does our audience. So there's a question about, how does topical CBD work through the skin?
So it turns out that CBD is very fat loving and actually does not cross the skin very well unless you bring blood to the skin. If you're doing deep massage and you notice the skin starting to get reddish, some CBD might cross from the skin into the capillaries. But mostly what I describe is that CBD can augment the endocannabinoid tone of the skin, that CBD can be useful, that we have cannabinoid receptors in the peripheral nerves that innervate the skin, and that there are ways of targeting local comfort. I mean, the way that I describe it is, let's say somebody has joint discomfort. They work CBD into their knee, and then I would also recommend they take CBD internally and kind of come at it from both angles. That would be a way of helping their comfort.
All righty, next question is, how much research has there been on CBG, and what is the difference between CBD and CBG on or in the body?
Sure. So the completely different molecules. The thing that's so dizzying about the cannabis plant medicine is that there may be as many as 120 different plant cannabinoids. Well, I don't know if you can see, this is actually the structure of CBD behind me over here on my whiteboard. Basically, the CBG molecule has some alterations. I believe that if, the CBD has this ring closure here, and with CBG, it sort of opens up. There's a couple of extra carbons thrown in there. It's not a ring structure in that moiety. CBG is the mother. The plant biosynthetic pathway starts with CBG. Actually, specific CBG acid. We're not even going to go there right now. CBG gets converted into either CBD or THC. When we look at the receptor targets, CBG has different effects. Cannabinoid receptors. CBD has actually activity at serotonin receptors. CBG does not. CBD has activity at certain transcription factors, may mediate inflammatory responses. It's unclear if CBG does. CBG is being used for gut health. CBD may also be used for that. CBG, some report have a more energizing effect. Some people take CBG and it stimulates them. CBD is often reported to be relaxing. So these are some of the differences between the two molecules.
All right, well, thank you. We have another question. And what is the best delivery to the body to have the best effect for the ECS? Because it is no longer what we eat, it's what we absorb.
Sure. Best could be qualified in a couple of ways. If you want the most rapid way, smoking is going to get cannabinoids into your brain the most rapidly. That also has its other challenges. When you smoke cannabis, there's a lot of, the smoke itself contains a lot of free radicals that can damage the lungs. I honestly think that using tinctures, using soft gels are really great. Not all of it absorbs, but it can be useful in a number of different ways. The soft gel, there is some metabolism in the liver. You don't get all of it in the brain, but there's new studies coming out on CBD augmenting the gut microbiome. So what a better way of augmenting the gut microbiome than delivering a capsule directly into the intestines. And I think that some of the properties on CBD altering the gut microbiome might be some of its effects for various chronic issues.
All right, well, I don't see any other questions in here. So just to reiterate for anybody who is excited to rewatch this webinar, the recording will be available, but it may not be available immediately like normally. So I would check in the morning. You'll all receive an email about 5 minutes after we end that will have some links to some of these research articles, some other information that CV Sciences would like to share. Also a discount off of some of their products from LASA OMS. So check for that promo code. I want to thank you, Miles. I want to thank CV Sciences for this incredible webinar. I've seen a lot of really positive responses, and everybody here really enjoyed themselves. I want to thank everyone who took their time out tonight to listen to us speak. And we have our next webinar happening on November the 17th, and it is going to be a facial acupuncture panel discussion featuring Shelley Goldstein, Mary Elizabeth Wakefield, and Michelle Gellis. So don't miss that. You can find the registration on our blog. And I just want to thank everyone again. Hope you have a great night, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much for your time today. Everybody have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Miles.
Take care.